Hey everyone, my new single Wanderer is available everywhere now, so go have a listen to it, add it to some playlists, and spread it around like COVID. So if you're just joining us, this is the second song on an album I'm in the process of writing that's based on key events in the biblical narrative. So the first song was called East of Eden. You can go listen to that right now. And this one jumps forward to the call of Abram, and the song's called Wanderer. So for this song, I tried to put myself in the situation that Abram found himself in, because a lot had happened since the fall, and most of it was pretty terrible. In fact, in the very next chapter after the fall, we read about Cain murdering his own brother Abel. So very quickly, we see the devastating consequences of sin in the world as a result of Adam and Eve's disobedience. So we've got Cain murdering his brother Abel, the Nephilim, and in fact, things get so bad that in Genesis 6, we read, Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. So that's pretty strong, pretty devastating, isn't it? Every intent of the thought of his heart was only evil continually. The Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. The Lord said, I will blot out man, whom I have created from the face of the land, from man to animals to creeping things, and to birds of the sky, for I am sorry that I have made them. So things had gotten really bad. The very real consequences of sin had just got a grip on humanity and was completely distorting these image bearers. So much so that they were barely recognizable as the image of God. And so we read that God actually was sorry that he'd made them, which is tragic. So after that, we have the flood and the Tower of Babel. And this is the backdrop for Abram's life, just tragedy after tragedy. So that's why in the first verse of my song, I have him almost in despair. He's kind of looking back at everything that's happened, looking back at all that happened with his forefathers and realizing that he was stuck in this cycle that he's powerless to break. There's something that's got a grip on mankind and there's not much he can do about it. And there's a hint of disillusionment there. So in my song, I have him saying, tormented and lost, I'm a slave to my past. So the penny starts to drop, that something is going on. There's this power at work, which is destroying everybody's lives. Now, it might sound a bit odd to paint such a lost and hopeless picture of this pillar of our faith, but I actually think it's quite accurate. In Genesis, we read almost nothing about Abram's life before God called him. His name first appears a few sentences earlier, and it was just at the end of a really long genealogy. He's just another name there. He isn't particularly noteworthy. He's done nothing that we read about. So the only things we're told is that he's got a wife called Sarai who can't have any children. His father Terah took him and Lot and left the land to go to Canaan, but they never quite got there and settled in a place called Haran. And that's all we learn. We think that Abram, this giant of the faith, would have done at least something to demonstrate his strength of character or his faith, but there's none of that. There's nothing spectacular at all. And actually, when we look further, we read in Joshua that Abram was an idol worshipper. So not only had he not done anything particularly noteworthy, he was an idolater. And as we read later on in the text, God hates idolatry. And so that was the place that Abram was in when God made these huge promises, when God decided that this man, Abram, was going to be the means through which he was going to rescue humanity. That's incredible. I think that tells us a lot about the character of God, that all of his saving acts are completely undeserved and a total gift of grace. God meets us where we're at and leads us out. So all these things, along with Abram's nomadic lifestyle, got me thinking about him as a wanderer, a bit of a lost soul, someone with no purpose and no direction. And so it was, but knowing that there's more, that's the key. So I think he was searching, knowing that something wasn't right. And it was in the midst of this disillusionment that when he heard God's voice, he recognized it as truth and light, and had the courage to leave everything and follow him, no matter the cost and no matter where it led. Which is remarkable because he didn't have much to go on, and God was asking him to leave every form of security he knew, to leave his family, to leave his inheritance, and to go to a place that he didn't even know the name of. So there were just no assurances at all. And of course, in those days, there were no oracles, there were no books of Moses. Abram had nothing to go on, except he had a heart that was seeking, that was hungry, and he was able to discern truth and light. And then, of course, he had the courage to follow it no matter the cost, which is great. That's what God requires of us, isn't it? And so to try and get that point across, this big moment in Abram's life when he finally hears truth and light breaking through his darkness, to try and do that musically for the music nerds among us, at that point in the song, I think it's 2 minutes 36, that's the first time we get to chord 1 in the harmony. So if you listen carefully, you may notice that at 2 minutes 36, it sounds like we've arrived home a bit. It sounds a bit more resolved. That's because that's the first time I play the home key, the home chord of the key that we're in. So that was just me trying to be clever, because it was a big moment I think for Abraham and for us in the midst of his wandering, of his searching. He finally hears that thing that he didn't know was there. He didn't know what to name it, but he recognized it as truth and light. And it must have just been like this flood coming over him. So I tried to do that a little bit in the song. But this was a really big moment in Israel's history, and I would argue in our history. This moment when God called Abram and made these promises. The promises that God made to him in this story were going to shape Israelite history for thousands of years. So the promise of land, the promise of blessing, of descendants, of protection. This is a huge part of Israel's understanding as a nation and their vocation in the world. So big event in Israelite history, and I would argue our history. So of course it had to be in this album. So I think that's about it for now. Hope you enjoy the song, and I'll catch you on the next one.